Brother borrowed $50,000 then disappeared. When I found him, he smirked, "What loan?" The truth left everyone speechless. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. I've spent the last 2 years trying to wrap my head around what happened, and honestly, I still can't believe it. It's the kind of thing you hear about in movies or from a distant coworker's friend, except it happened to me. Let me start from the beginning. My name's Clive. I'm a mechanic from Odessa, Texas. My life has always been simple, nothing flashy, just a small garage I run myself, a little house I've worked hard to pay off, and my 2 dogs, Rusty and Scout. I've always prided myself on being practical. I save for what I need, plan for what I don't, and I don't gamble with money. My younger brother Darvin? He's the opposite. Darvin was always the charmer, the dreamer, the one who walked into a room and could convince strangers to share their life stories within minutes. He had this magnetic personality that made you want to believe in him, no matter how wild his ideas sounded. And boy, did he have ideas. When we were teenagers, it was a skateboard company. He was going to design the next big thing and be bigger than Tony Hawk. Then it was a startup selling gourmet hot dogs. After that, cryptocurrency. The guy could talk anyone into thinking he was on the verge of a breakthrough. The problem was, none of these schemes ever panned out. Over the years, I watched him borrow money from family and friends, always with the promise that they were investing in something huge. My parents were the first ones to fall for it, loaning him $5,000 to start a landscaping business. He bought the equipment, but 6 months later, everything was rusting in a storage unit while Darvin moved on to better opportunities. Then there was our cousin Marion, who handed over $10,000 for some kind of revolutionary app Darvin was working on. I never understood what the app was supposed to do, and I'm not sure Darvin did either. But Marion was convinced, and that money disappeared faster than a sneeze in a windstorm. Despite all this, I stayed out of it. I wasn't going to get involved. I had seen the pattern. Darvin would borrow, promise, fail, and move on. My parents tried to cover for him, telling me, "He's just finding his way," or "This is how great entrepreneurs start." I didn't buy it, but I didn't say much. It wasn't my money on the line. That changed 2 years ago. Darvin came to me one evening, looking more desperate than I'd ever seen him. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him seem almost human for once. He said he was in trouble, big trouble, and he needed my help. I should have said no. I should have turned him away like a rational person. But there's something about family that screws with your brain. You want to believe they'll change. You want to think this time will be different. And damn it, Darvin knew exactly how to play me. He told me he'd found the opportunity of a lifetime. A business deal with some investors that could make us both rich. All he needed was $50,000 to buy into the venture. He made it sound like a sure thing, an exclusive deal where he had connections that no one else could tap into. He said he was doing this for us, for the family. He even threw in some guilt about how I'd never believed in him before and how this was his one chance to prove himself. Here's the kicker, I actually had the money. Not because I was rich, but because I'd been saving for years. I'd planned to expand my garage and maybe even hire a couple of guys to help with the workload. That $50,000 was my entire nest egg. Every dollar I'd saved from long hours, skipped vacations, and living like a monk was sitting in my savings account. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the way Darvin looked at me, like he was finally admitting he needed me. Maybe it was the promise that this time would be different. Maybe it was sheer stupidity. But I said yes. I transferred the money the next morning. The first month after that was full of excuses. Darvin wasn't returning my calls, but when I did manage to reach him, he'd tell me he was swamped with work. He said the deal was going great, but it was complicated, and he needed time to finalize things. Then he stopped answering altogether. By month 2, I started to panic. I called my parents, who said they hadn't heard from Darvin in weeks. I called Marion, who told me she'd given up on trying to get her $10,000 back. I even tried tracking down a couple of Darvin's old friends, but none of them knew where he was. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. At first, I told myself he was just busy. Then I told myself he'd come back with some amazing news about how much money he'd made. But as the weeks dragged on, reality set in. Darvin wasn't coming back, not with my money, anyway. I didn't want to admit it, but I'd been scammed. By my own brother. After about 6 months of complete radio silence, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to let Darvin walk all over me like he had everyone else. This wasn't $500 or some pocket change, it was my entire future. I didn't know where to start, but I was determined to find him and get my money back, or at least make sure he paid for what he'd done. First, I hired a private investigator. I didn't think it would work because Darvin wasn't the type to stay in one place. But after a couple of weeks, the investigator came back with something. Darvin was living in Phoenix, Arizona. Not only that, but he was living large. He had a new condo, a shiny BMW, and was apparently throwing parties like he was a rock star. I was furious. The guy who had begged me for money was now living the high life while I was busting my knuckles in a garage trying to make ends meet. But I wasn't about to just show up at his door. No, I wanted to make this count. I wanted him to feel the kind of humiliation and betrayal he'd made me feel. I started digging into everything Darvin had been doing. I called up some old friends of his, tracked down anyone who had lent him money, and started piecing together the truth. Turns out, I wasn't the only one he'd scammed recently. Darvin had borrowed thousands from at least 5 other people in Phoenix, promising the same fake business deal he'd sold me on. He was running a full-blown con, hopping from city to city and living off other people's hard-earned cash. Then I found out something even bigger. Darvin had been lying about his business connections. The money he was using wasn't going into any deals, it was funding his gambling habit. He'd gotten deep into sports betting and poker, and he was losing big. That's where my $50,000 had gone. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had to stop him before he ruined more lives. So, I came up with a plan. First, I got in touch with all the people he'd scammed in Phoenix. It wasn't hard to convince them to work with me once they heard my story. We decided to confront Darvin together, but not in a way he'd expect. I knew Darvin loved the spotlight, so we set him up. One of his victims, a guy named Hector, agreed to play along. Hector told Darvin he had a rich friend who was interested in a big investment deal. Darvin, always hungry for more cash, jumped at the chance. We arranged for a meeting at a fancy restaurant in downtown Phoenix. What Darvin didn't know was that the rich friend was a hired actor, and every other table in the restaurant was filled with people he'd scammed, including me. The night of the meeting, Darvin showed up dressed to the nines, grinning like he owned the place. He didn't recognize me at first because I was sitting at a table in the corner with a hat pulled low over my face. The actor played his part perfectly, letting Darvin ramble on about this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Darvin was so deep in his pitch, he didn't notice the other tables quietly filling up with angry faces. Finally, I stood up. When Darvin saw me, his face went pale. "Hello, Darvin," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Long time no see." He stammered something about being busy, but I wasn't letting him off the hook. I walked over to his table and threw down a folder filled with evidence I'd gathered, bank records, text messages, and even photos of him at casinos. The actor stood up and revealed he wasn't a rich investor, just someone I'd hired to play along. The restaurant erupted. One by one, the other people he'd scammed stood up and started confronting him. Darvin tried to weasel his way out, but there was no escape. By the time we were done, the restaurant staff had called the police. Turns out, with the amount of evidence we collected, we had enough to press charges for fraud. Watching Darvin being led out of the restaurant in handcuffs was the most satisfying moment of my life. But it didn't end there. I worked with a lawyer to file a civil lawsuit against him. Between me and the other victims, we managed to win a case that forced Darvin to sell everything he owned to pay us back. The condo? Gone. The BMW? Gone. The flashy lifestyle? Over. In the end, I didn't get all my money back. Darvin had burned through too much of it. But I got enough to rebuild my savings and expand my garage like I'd planned. Even better, Darvin ended up with a criminal record and a reputation so trashed he couldn't con his way out of a paper bag. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about taking back control and making sure Darvin couldn't hurt anyone else. For once in his life, Darvin had to face the consequences of his actions. And let me tell you, it felt damn good.